"You can't stay here, Dad." The words, sharp enough to cut the crisp New Hampshire air, struck me with the force of a physical blow. I stood frozen on the bluestone path, my weekend bag slipping from suddenly numb fingers. Just moments ago, my heart had been filled with the quiet joy of returning to this sanctuary, this heritage lake house on Winnipesaukee that Helen and I had built with our own hands, a testament to a lifetime of hard work. The 2-hour drive from Boston had been a pleasant blur of fall foliage, a peaceful journey away from the relentless demands of my architecture firm, a pilgrimage back to the place her memory lived most vividly. I had been picturing it all: a glass of bourbon on the terrace, the scent of pine needles, the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. But the scene before me was a jarring betrayal of that vision. Two figures in plush white bathrobes stood on my private terrace, coffee mugs steaming in their hands. My daughter, Clara, leaned against the railing, her dark hair a stark silhouette against the afternoon Sunday. Beside her, her husband, Bryce, shifted uncomfortably the moment he saw me, his posture screaming guilt. "What the hell is this?" I managed to mutter, the words feeling foreign in my own throat. Clara straightened, her face hardening into a mask of cold dismissal I had never seen before. Not even during her most rebellious teenage years had she looked at me with such profound contempt. "Bryce and I are having a romantic weekend," she called out, her voice echoing with an authority she had no right to claim in this place. I blinked, certain I had misheard. My mind struggled to reconcile the daughter who used to beg for bedtime stories with the icy stranger standing before me. "Clara, this is my house," I started, the absurdity of having to state the obvious making my voice trail off. "The deed, the mortgage I had paid off a decade ago, the property taxes I still paid every year, they all bore the name Arthur Pendleton." "I don't care," she shot back, setting her mug down with a sharp clink that resonated with finality. "We were here first. We're not leaving." Bryce mumbled something incoherent, a weak attempt at mediation perhaps, but Clara waved him into silence. Her bathrobe fell open slightly, and she pulled it tighter with an angry jerk, as if my very presence were an unwelcome intrusion on her comfort. I took a tentative step toward the front door, my mind reeling. "Honey, I drove 2 hours. I just wanted a quiet weekend. We can share the space." "Get out of here and don't bother us," she shouted, the words escalating into a command. "You're just in the way." In the way. In my own home. The place where Helen and I had planned to grow old together. The place I came to feel close to her, to hear her laughter in the rustle of the birch trees. I stood there, bag at my feet, staring at my only child as she glared at me from the terrace of the home I built. 28 years old, and she was ordering me off my own property like I was a trespasser. A voice, Helen's voice, whispered in my memory, a constant refrain from the last 3 years. "Be patient with her, Arthur. She's still grieving." I had given her patience. I had given her understanding. And this was what it had gotten me. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash. "I'll go." Bending to pick up my bag felt like an admission of defeat, my knees creaking under the weight of a sudden immense weariness. 62 years old, and my own daughter was treating me like dirt beneath her shoes. "Good," Clara called out, her voice already losing its sharp edge, softening now that she had won. "Next time, call before you show up." The 2-hour drive back to Boston was a silent, agonizing journey. The vibrant autumn colors that had soothed my soul on the way up now seemed to mock me, their beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness that had transpired. I drove on autopilot, replaying the scene on the terrace again and again. Clara's cold eyes, Bryce's cowardly silence, the finality in her voice as she ordered me away. Each memory was a fresh wound. Where had my sweet little girl gone? The one who had held my hand so tightly at Helen's funeral, promising we would get through it together. Had this cruel, entitled stranger been lurking beneath the surface all along? Or had I, in my grief-stricken desire to give her everything, somehow created this monster of entitlement? I pulled into my garage in Boston just as dusk was settling, the familiar space of my city home feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress I had retreated to. The house was quiet, filled with the ghosts of a happier time. I poured a bourbon, the amber liquid doing little to warm the chill that had settled deep in my bones. Just as I was about to lose myself in melancholy, my phone buzzed. It was a number from New Hampshire. Silas. Mr. Pendleton? Sorry to bother you so late, sir. The old caretaker's voice was hesitant, laced with a worry he couldn't quite hide. It's just Miss Clara's in-laws, the Vances, they called me this afternoon. Asked about the plumbing and the heating schedule. I sat up straighter. What did they want, Silas? Well, sir, that's the thing. They were talking like they were moving in. Asked when the best day for a moving truck would be. I just wanted to make sure you knew about it, sir. It sounded permanent. The bourbon soured in my stomach. The romantic weekend was a lie. This was a reconnaissance mission. Thank you for telling me, Silas. You did the right thing. Okay. I had barely hung up when the phone rang again. This time, it was Clara. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice a calm I did not feel. Arthur Pendleton. Dad, we need to talk, she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. I'm glad you left yesterday. It makes this easier. Bryce and I have decided. The lake house now belongs to the Vances. The sheer audacity of the statement left me breathless. What did you just say? You heard me. It's their home now. You're forbidden from going there anymore. 30 years of 12-hour days, of battling contractors and city inspectors, of pouring my heart and soul into creating that home, all dismissed in a single callous sentence. Clara, you can't just give away my property. Her laugh was brittle, devoid of humor. You're being ridiculously selfish. You hardly use it, and they're struggling. Besides, what does a lonely old man need with such a big house? It's wasted on you. Oh, the insult, so casually delivered, failed to wound me this time. Instead, it ignited a cold, hard flame in my chest. Helen's advice about patience had its limits. This was not grief talking. This was pure, unadulterated greed. That is my home, Clara. The answer is no. A stunned silence crackled over the line. She had never heard that word from me before. Not once, in the 3 years since Helen died. You can't say no to me, she stammered, her composure cracking. Mom would be ashamed of you. That was it, the final line. Invoking her mother's memory to justify this theft was a betrayal so profound it severed the last thread of patience I had. Your mother, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, would be horrified by what you have become. I heard her sharp intake of breath, a prelude to a storm of rage, but I did not wait to hear it. For the first time in our lives, I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. A new beginning. The war had been declared, and she had no idea she was fighting a man who had never lost one. Sleep did not come. I sat in my leather chair until the first gray light of dawn crept into my Boston study, but it was not a night of restless grief. It was a night of cold, architectural clarity. The emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for 3 years had finally burned away, revealing the man I used to be, the man who built a business empire on foresight, strategy, and an unshakable understanding of leverage. I thought about Frank Morrison, the developer who tried to muscle me out of the Harbor District project back in '98. He used intimidation and bluster. I used quiet, methodical precision, securing his key subcontractors while he was busy making threats. The parallel was unmistakable. Clara was using emotional terrorism. It was time to respond with superior engineering. My mind, dormant for so long, began working the problem. I broke it down into components: assets, timelines, risks, and desired outcomes. The objective was not simply to defend my property, but to deliver a lesson so profound, so unforgettable, that no one would ever again mistake my kindness for weakness. At 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, I was sitting in the plush client chair opposite Alistair Finch. His corner office, overlooking the Boston Harbor, was a sanctuary of mahogany and quiet competence. Alistair, my attorney for 15 years, listened without interruption as I laid out the situation, his pen gliding across a legal pad. Family disputes over property are the ugliest, Arthur, he said finally, his expression grim. They are not about the asset. They are about power. What are my options to fortify the ownership? Several, Alistair replied, all business. We can place the property into an irrevocable trust. We can create an LLC to act as a barrier. First and foremost, we ensure your deed and title are ironclad. We will send a formal cease and desist letter, warning them of legal action if they set foot on the property. A formal letter. It was the correct legal move, the professional approach, but it felt inadequate. A letter would not convey the magnitude of Clara's betrayal. It would not teach her the lesson she so desperately needed to learn. It was a shield, but I needed a sword. Let's start with reinforcing the documentation, Alistair, I said, my mind already racing ahead. I want it to be legally untouchable. I left his office an hour later with a folder of legal jargon and a sense of profound dissatisfaction. The law was a blunt instrument, slow and predictable. Clara and Bryce would see it coming. They would hire their own lawyers, drag it out, and turn it into another negotiation, another opportunity for them to wear me down. Walking through the financial district, surrounded by the towering glass and steel structures I knew so well, I realized the solution could not be found in a law book. It had to be found in the language of my own trade: design, structure, and overwhelming impact. And that was when I thought of Leo, my neighbor. A brilliant, slightly eccentric software engineer who owed me a favor after I had helped redesign his basement to stop a flooding issue. I remembered the incredible smart home system he had built for himself, controlling everything from his phone with a casual flick of his thumb. A purely legal defense was passive. A technological defense, however, that could be active. It could be creative. It could be an architectural masterpiece of psychological warfare. A small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in days. Clara had threatened me, confident in her position. She had no idea I was about to change the very foundation of the battlefield. The architect was done grieving. It was time to start building. I found Leo in his natural habitat, a home office that looked like a command center, surrounded by glowing monitors displaying cascading lines of code. He spun around in his chair as I entered, a half-eaten bag of chips in one hand. "Arthur, what is the good word?" "I have a creative technical project for you, Leo," I said, getting straight to the point. "A home automation challenge. It involves motion sensors, a robust security system, and some theatrical elements." Leo's eyes lit up behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He pushed the chips aside, his full attention captured. "Theatrical? Arthur, you are speaking my language. Tell me everything." I laid out the general concept, omitting the family drama, and framing it as a surprise for some unwelcome guests who were planning to squat at my lake house. I described my vision: a house that would seem to come alive, a smart home that would intelligently and relentlessly encourage intruders to leave. His grin was infectious. "So, we are not just building a security system. We are building a technologically advanced haunted house. A ghost in the machine. Literally. I am 100% in. When do we start?" His enthusiasm was a welcome antidote to the poison of the last few days. Before we could begin the fun part, however, I had one final piece of architecture to put in place. The most important one. The next morning, I called Alistair Finch with new instructions that made the seasoned lawyer pause for a full 5 seconds. "Arthur, are you certain?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "Draw up the papers. I want to donate the Lake Winnipesaukee property to the Second Chance Foundation for Homeless Assistance. The transfer is to be immediate and irrevocable." "And the clause?" "With a lifetime usage clause for myself as the donor, I retain full access and control of the property until my death." It was the perfect, elegant solution. A checkmate. With a single signature, Clara's entire scheme would be rendered moot. She could threaten, sue, or scream all she wanted, but she could not take what was no longer mine to give. The property would be protected by a charitable foundation, and any legal challenge she mounted would be against an organization with far deeper pockets and a much more sympathetic public image than a disgruntled daughter. More than that, it was a move Helen would have loved. Taking a symbol of our family's success and using it to give others a chance at a home, it was the ultimate answer to Clara's greed. By the end of the day, the papers were signed. My ownership of the lake house was legally extinguished. I was now merely a lifetime tenant in a home owned by a charity. The following morning, Leo's SUV was loaded to the gills with equipment. Motion detectors, programmable LED strips, wireless speakers, hidden cameras, and a tablet that would serve as our control panel. As we merged onto the highway, heading north from Boston, the mood was one of quiet, focused energy. "You know," Leo said, glancing over at me from the driver's seat, "for a retired architect you have a flair for psychological warfare." I looked out at the passing landscape, a rare, genuine smile on my face. "Sometimes the most important part of a structure," I said, "is the part no one sees coming." We arrived at the lake house under the cover of a crisp, clear afternoon. The villa stood silent, peacefully unaware of the technological nervous system we were about to install within its walls. Leo moved with the focused energy of a master craftsman, his mind already mapping out the project. "First, the eyes and ears," he announced, opening a case filled with devices no larger than a silver dollar. "Motion sensors and cameras. We put them everywhere, but we make them invisible." For the next several hours we worked in tandem. My architectural knowledge of the house's sightlines and hidden spaces complemented his technical expertise. A sensor tucked into the recessed lighting of the entryway. A pinhole camera disguised as a screwhead on a bookshelf. Another sensor hidden in the decorative scrollwork of the grand staircase. Leo worked with a surgeon's precision, running whisper-thin wires behind baseboards and through wall cavities I had designed decades ago. "The key is to cover every possible path," he explained, mounting a device behind a smoke detector. "No matter where they go, the house will know. It will see them." By late afternoon, the physical network was in place. It was time to program the house's new soul. Leo set up his laptop on the granite kitchen island, the screen coming alive with schematics and programming interfaces. "Okay, Maestro," he said to me. "Time for the script. What does the house say when it wakes up?" We spent an hour crafting the perfect sequence of warnings. The first trigger, from the entryway sensor, would be almost polite. A firm, synthesized voice announcing, "This property is under the private management of the Second Chance Foundation. Your presence has not been authorized. Please vacate immediately." "Then we escalate," Leo said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "If motion continues for 30 seconds, Phase 2 kicks in." The second message was more severe. "Warning, you are trespassing. Security protocols have been activated. Authorities will be notified if you do not leave now." The final phase, triggered by movement in any of the main living areas, was designed for maximum psychological impact. Intrusion detected. System lockdown imminent. Vacate now. Next came the symphony of chaos. I watched, fascinated, as Leo programmed the lighting arrays. Not just simple flashing, but disorienting, strobing patterns of red and blue designed to induce confusion and mild panic. Then, he integrated the water systems. After the first warning, he explained, "We will have the faucets turn on and off randomly. It is a classic psychological trick. Unpredictable events create a sense of powerlessness." The final layer was the soundscape. Using the small wireless speakers we had hidden in every room, Leo began to weave a tapestry of unsettling noises. The sound of heavy footsteps pacing in an empty upstairs hallway. The faint whisper of a voice, its words just unintelligible. The sudden, sharp creak of a floorboard right behind you. "It will not be a constant barrage," he said, calibrating the audio levels. "That is amateur stuff. The system will layer the sounds randomly. Long periods of silence, then a single, sharp noise. It keeps the brain on edge, always anticipating the next threat." As the sun began to set over Lake Winnipesaukee, we stood back and admired our work. The house looked exactly as it always had, a peaceful, beautiful retreat, but we knew the truth. Beneath its serene surface, a ghost now waited in the machine, an intelligent, relentless presence, ready to defend its territory. "There is one last piece to this puzzle," Leo said the next morning, gesturing towards a heavy-duty case he had left in the truck. "The heart of the operation. We need to make this house immortal." He led me down to the basement, to the neatly organized electrical panel I had designed myself. Beside it, he unlatched the case, revealing a series of industrial-grade batteries and an inverter. "Backup power," he explained, his voice echoing slightly in the cool, subterranean air. "The first thing a panicked person does is try to kill the lights. They will run to this panel and flip every breaker. It will not matter. This system will kick in automatically, and our ghost will keep running for a week straight, even if the whole neighborhood goes dark. His foresight was brilliant. It was the kind of contingency planning that won contracts and, in this case, wars. We spent 2 hours wiring the backup system directly into our network, hiding the batteries behind a false panel that looked like a permanent part of the foundation. The trap was now not only intelligent, but invulnerable. With the technical work complete, we moved on to the final psychological touch. "They need a warning," I said, pulling out a sheet of paper where I had sketched a design, something that feels both official and deeply unsettling. Leo studied my sketch. "Welcome to the House of the Future. Enter at your own risk." He let out a low whistle. "That is beautiful, Arthur. It is a warning, a legal disclaimer, and a taunt, all in one. It dares them to enter." We drove to the nearby town and had the sign professionally printed on a sleek aluminum plate. An hour later, we were mounting it beside the front door. It looked official, like something from a tech expo, giving the entire operation a veneer of legitimacy. To any outside observer, it would seem I was showcasing an elaborate smart home system. To Clara and her family, it would be the first clue that they were walking into a place where the rules they understood no longer applied. Back inside, with the sun beginning its descent, Leo held up the master control tablet. "Time for the final dress rehearsal," he said, his expression a mixture of excitement and professional focus. "You stay here. I will be the intruder. I am going to walk through the front door, and you watch what the house does." He went outside while I stood in the living room, my eyes fixed on the tablet screen. A moment later, the entryway sensor on the schematic lit up in red. Motion detected. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The lights began their disorienting strobe. The firm, synthesized voice boomed from the hidden speakers, delivering its first warning. On the walls, the projectors cast their ghostly, dancing shadows. I watched as Leo moved into the living room, and 30 seconds later, Phase 2 erupted. The warnings grew more severe, and the sound of rushing water echoed from every bathroom in the kitchen. Layered on top of it all were the whispers and footsteps, a symphony of engineered dread. Leo walked through the entire house, triggering every sensor, while I watched the system respond flawlessly on the tablet. It was a perfect, coordinated performance of psychological chaos. He returned to the living room a few minutes later, drenched from walking under a randomly activated showerhead, but grinning from ear to ear. "It is a masterpiece," he declared, shaking water from his hair. "They do not stand a chance." Locking the door behind us for the final time, I felt a profound sense of completion. The architect and the engineer had finished their work. The stage was set. All that was left was for the actors to arrive and play their parts. On Sunday, my Boston study transformed into a command center. I sat in my leather chair, a general before the battle, watching 3 monitors that displayed a mosaic of silent, high-definition feeds from the lake house. The property was deceptively serene. Sunlight sparkled on Lake Winnipesaukee. Birds flitted between the pines. It was the perfect stage for the drama about to unfold. On the desk, my smartphone displayed the master control app Leo had designed, its single, ominous execute button glowing softly. Everything was ready. At 2:28 p.m., precisely on schedule, a dark blue minivan appeared on the approach road camera. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening slightly. They were here. I watched as Clara emerged first, stretching with the casual arrogance of a new queen surveying her conquered territory. Bryce and his parents, Richard and Eleanor Vance, followed, moving with the eager anticipation of people about to receive a prize they had not earned. They gathered at the front door, a unified front of entitlement, and then they saw the sign. I zoomed in on the entryway camera. I could see Eleanor Vance stop short, her face twisting in annoyance as she read the professionally printed words, "Welcome to the House of the Future. Enter at your own risk." "What is this nonsense?" Her voice, sharp and imperious, carried clearly through the audio pickup. "Oh, that is just Dad being weird." Clara's dismissive laugh grated on my ears. "He probably thought it was funny. Do not worry about it." But Eleanor was not one to be ignored. With a surprising show of strength, she grabbed the aluminum placard and ripped it from the wall. The sign clattered onto the stone steps. "There," she declared, kicking the fallen sign aside with contempt. "I will not have some silly warning ruining our first day in our new home." "Perfect," Clara applauded. "This is your house now. That was all I needed to see." They had been given fair warning. They had rejected it with scorn. Palmer inserted the key. The door swung open, and the four of them stepped across the threshold. I watched them on the interior cameras, their voices echoing as they admired the architecture, already planning where to put their furniture. I let them wander for a full 5 minutes. I watched them claim the master bedroom, critique the kitchen layout, and debate the best view. I let them feel the full, unadulterated thrill of their victory. I let them get comfortable in their stolen home. Then, with a calm, steady hand, my finger hovering over the screen of my phone, I pressed execute. The transformation was instantaneous. On my monitors, I saw every light in the villa erupt into a coordinated, chaotic strobe of red and blue. Simultaneously, the sound of rushing water thundered through the house as every faucet and showerhead turned on at full blast. I watched Clara's face, visible on the living room camera, contort from smug satisfaction to utter shock. Bryce spun around, his mouth agape, trying to comprehend the sensory assault. And then, the voice joined the chorus. From every hidden speaker, the calm, synthesized announcement boomed, cutting through the chaos. This property is under the private management of the Second Chance Foundation. Your presence has not been authorized. Please vacate immediately. The technological nightmare had begun. From my vantage point in Boston, I had a God's eye view of the chaos. As the initial shock wore off, panic took its place. The house, my silent accomplice, escalated its performance. Ghostly, life-sized shadows began to dance and writhe across the living room walls, projected with unsettling realism. Eleanor Vance shrieked, stumbling backward into a chair, as a dark figure seemed to lunge toward her before dissolving into pixels. Then the layered sounds began. A child's faint giggle from an empty bedroom, the sharp creak of a floorboard from the floor above them, a sibilant whisper that seemed to emanate from just over their shoulders. I watched them run from room to room, a frantic, disorganized retreat, but the house was relentless. Each new room they entered triggered a new combination of strobing lights and unnerving sounds. The voice assistant's warnings grew more severe, its tone shifting from authoritative to menacing. Warning, you are trespassing. Security protocols have been activated. Bryce, trying to play the hero, fumbled with his phone, its flashlight cutting a pathetic beam through the flashing chaos. There has to be a breaker box, he yelled over the din of rushing water and synthesized threats. But every path led to more confusion, more terror. It was Clara who finally broke. I watched on camera as she collapsed onto the hallway floor, hands over her ears, and screamed, "Call the police! Somebody call the police!" I saw the call log appear on my app. 911. Perfect. As the app tracked the dispatcher's notification to the local New Hampshire precinct, I waited. The moment the police cruiser's headlights appeared on the approach road camera, I initiated the system standby command. Instantly, the house fell silent. The lights returned to their warm, ambient glow. The water ceased its torrential flow. The shadows on the walls vanished. When the two officers knocked on the door, they were greeted by four terrified, soaking wet people in a perfectly calm, quiet house. From my monitors, I watched the officers conduct a thorough search, their expressions shifting from professional concern to weary skepticism. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no faulty wiring, no explanation for the haunted house Clara was hysterically describing. "Ma'am," one officer said, his voice a flat tone of finality, "everything seems to be in order. Maybe a power surge tripped your smart system." They left Clara standing on the porch, looking like a madwoman. The psychological victory was complete. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in the living room, too afraid to sleep, too bewildered to leave. At the first hint of dawn, they fled, scrambling into their minivan and speeding away as if escaping a real ghost. The phone rang at exactly 7:30 in the morning. I let it ring twice before answering, pitching my voice with sleepy concern. "Clara? Is everything all right?" "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice raw with exhaustion and fury. "What did you do to that house, you sick, twisted old man?" I let a beat of confused silence hang in the air. "Honey, what are you talking about? Did something happen?" I listened as she recounted the night's events in a frantic, disjointed tirade. The lights, the voices, the water, the shadows. I made the appropriate sympathetic noises. My God, that sounds terrifying. Are you sure you did not imagine some of it? Stress can do strange things. 4 people had the same hallucination? She screamed back. It is a documented phenomenon. Group hysteria, I offered gently. The police found nothing wrong, you said. It must have been a complex power surge. We are never coming back, she declared, her voice cracking. Never. The villa is yours. We do not want anything to do with that cursed place. That is probably wise, I agreed mildly. Sometimes houses develop personalities, especially when they feel their boundaries have been violated. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair, a deep, profound sense of satisfaction settling over me. The war was not over, but the decisive battle had been won. Clara's surrender over the phone was tactical, not total. I knew she would not give up that easily. True to form, the Tuesday morning camera feeds showed Bryce's car pulling into the villa's driveway once again. This time he had a passenger, a burly man carrying a heavy tool case, a locksmith. I almost laughed. It was such a predictable, brute force approach. They still thought they were dealing with a simple problem, a stubborn old man, not a comprehensive architectural strategy. From my study, I watched the locksmith examine the front door with a professional eye. I could see him shaking his head, pointing at the biometric scanner and the integrated wiring. Through the audio pickup, his words were a testament to Leo's genius. Sir, this is not a regular lock, he explained to Bryce. This is a fully integrated smart home security system. It is tied into the power, the network, everything. You cannot just replace it. You would need to reprogram the entire house. Bryce's frustration was palpable even on screen. I watched him argue, point, and finally slump in defeat as the locksmith packed his tools and drove away. The counterattack had failed before it even began. They had tried to force the door, only to find it was not the door that was the problem, but the entire foundation. That evening they came to my Boston home. There was no pretense this time, no feigned concern. They stormed up my walkway, their faces masks of fury. When I opened the door, Clara pushed past me. Cut the innocent act, she spat, her eyes blazing. You turned that house into a fortress of smart. Home security is quite popular these days, I observed mildly. Very effective against unauthorized access. Bryce stepped closer, using his height in a last-ditch effort at intimidation. This is your last chance, Arthur. Stop this ridiculous game and sign over the house, or you can forget you have a daughter. The threat was supposed to shatter me. 3 weeks ago it would have. Now it was just noise. Is that supposed to be a promise or a threat? I asked, my voice calm. Clara's control finally snapped. Fine. You want to play hardball? You will never see your grandchildren. When I have kids, I will make sure they never know their grandfather existed. You will die alone and forgotten, just like Mom. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking, invoking Helen's memory as a weapon. But the man she was speaking to was no longer the grieving widow she had so easily manipulated. He was an architect who had seen the final blueprint. Her emotional terrorism had no power here. I simply looked at her, my silence a more powerful response than any argument. I watched the fury in her eyes slowly curdle into confusion as she realized her ultimate threat had failed to land. Are you quite finished? I asked quietly. They stood there, momentarily speechless, their arsenal of threats and insults exhausted. I walked to the antique secretary desk in my hall and picked up a crisp, white envelope. I held it out to Clara. Your attacks are unproductive. However, I am prepared to resolve this matter once and for all. Be at this address tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Mr. Finch will explain everything. Clara took the envelope, her hand trembling slightly. It was a summons, not a surrender. She and Bryce looked at each other, their anger now mixed with a new, unfamiliar emotion, uncertainty. They had expected me to fight them on their terms. They had no idea I had already won on mine. The next morning, I was the first to arrive at Alistair Finch's conference room. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, calm and centered, watching the sailboats glide across the harbor. They arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, a united front of belligerents. Clara, Bryce, and the Vances filed in, their expressions a mixture of aggression and anticipation. They believed they were here to witness my surrender. They had come to collect their prize. "All right, Dad," Clara began, taking the chair directly opposite me. "We are here. Let's get this over with. We want the house transferred to the Vances immediately. No more games." I simply nodded to Alistair. My lawyer cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. He opened a thick folder and addressed the room with professional precision. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to clarify the ownership status of the Lake Winnipesaukee property." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "As of last Tuesday, Mr. Pendleton is no longer the legal owner of the villa." Clara's jaw dropped. "What? What does that mean?" Alistair continued, his tone unwavering. "Mr. Pendleton has transferred, in its entirety, the ownership of the property to the Second Chance Foundation for Homeless Assistance. The donation is legal, binding, and irrevocable." For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. I watched the sequence of emotions play across Clara's face. Utter disbelief, followed by a flash of wild fury, which then collapsed into a hollow, ashen shock. Bryce looked like he had been physically struck, his confident posture deflating like a punctured balloon. You cannot," Clara stammered, her voice a hoarse whisper. "That is our house. You tricked us." "On the contrary," Alistair said calmly, "Mr. Pendleton simply exercised his right to donate his own property. The foundation is now the sole owner. They are, however, contractually obligated to grant him a lifetime usage clause, allowing him to use the property as his residence until his death." "So you still get to use it?" she shrieked, the hysteria returning. "I do," I said, speaking for the first time. "But you do not. Not now, not ever. The property will never be part of any inheritance. It will never belong to you." The finality of it all finally landed. They had lost, completely. Their greed, their threats, their manipulation, it had all amounted to nothing. They had overplayed their hand so spectacularly that they had lost the very prize they sought to steal. Clara slumped in her chair, the fight completely gone, replaced by the devastating emptiness of total defeat. As they filed out of the room, broken and silent, I met my daughter's eyes one last time. There was no anger left in them, only a vast, barren landscape of regret. I had not destroyed her. She had destroyed herself. The drive to Lake Tahoe that afternoon was different. The journey was not an escape or a retreat, but a homecoming. The villa welcomed me with a profound silence, cleansed of the technological ghosts and the taint of betrayal. I walked out onto the terrace, the same terrace where this ordeal had begun, and looked out at the water. Helen's voice was not in my memory today. Instead, there was a quiet of my own making. I had not only reclaimed a house, I had reclaimed myself. The architect who had built an empire had finally remembered how to build boundaries around his own heart. The war was over. Peace had been won. Sometimes in life, the structures we build are not made of wood and stone, but of respect and resolve. True strength is not the inability to be hurt, but the wisdom to protect oneself from those who would cause harm, and the courage to redesign a life when its foundations are threatened. The kindest thing we can do for ourselves, and for others, is to honor the boundaries that define us. When we do that, we find a peace that, like a house built on a solid rock, can withstand any storm. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We love reading your thoughts, so be sure to share your impressions in the comments below. To listen to the next story, click on the video that appears on your screen. Thank you for watching.